Hello, I'm Bernard Norcott-Mahany, your instructor, and we're going to be looking at the beginning of Chapter 7, which focuses on Hermes and, to some extent, the goddess Hestia. So the first slide here, Hermes and Hestia. There is a quote from a man named Walter Otto, who wrote a short book. It's maybe 150 pages. It's not a very long book, called The Homeric Gods, where he looks at the gods as presented in Homer and suggests that he looks at what distinguishes the gods from humans, and he also figures that each god has a particular is his quality that identifies him as opposed to the others. So the gods are anthropomorphic. They look like humans. They are in human form. That's what anthropomorphic means. But they are not affected by circumstance. Humans are. Humans live in time. So the gods don't die. Bad things that happen to humans can't happen to the gods. Right, so that's the deal. So you got to keep that in mind for the gods. Each deity is distinguished by one essential and unchanging trait. And I checked out the book. I had to get it through Interlibrary loan. He doesn't go into like each one of the gods, what their singular trait is, but he does talk about Hermes, and he says joy. He is a god of joy. And he's a trickster god. He's basically, I like to think of him as he's largely a win-win god. A lot of the gods are vindictive. This is not particularly vindictive. He wants to win, but he doesn't always read that as that means you have to lose. And in fact, in Homeric hymn number 4, the hymn to Hermes that we're going to be looking at in this the first part of chapter 7, he cuts a deal with Apollo so that Apollo wins and he wins, right? So there aren't any losers. He is associated with travel and the acquisition. I think in all likelihood, probably as a rural god. Certainly Homeric hymn number 7 seems to suggest that. A regional god, but he then became a god of travel and of roads. And if you think of Hermes, he's always on the move. He travels a lot. So travel, communication, those sort of things are all connected with Hermes. Now, if we look here on the red figure vase, the picture here, this is red figure Pelike by the Pan painter. So the painter who painted also painted another vase which features the god Pan, who has a goat's head, a human body, and always has an erect phallus chasing after a shepherd who's running away. So this is by that same painter. It says 3 Herms. Herms are plinths, basically stone, on top of which there is a human head. It's usually bearded, and in the front there is an erect phallus, which you can see here for these three Herms, sort of like a herm. My guess is this is supposed to show a workshop where these Herms, maybe in fact the 3 are supposed to be connected, because the guys on the left and right look like they have holes that would fit where the extensions are on. Now, the word Herm obviously connects it to Hermes, but the word Herm originally seems to come from the Greek word herma, plural is hermai, and that word means a pile of stones, like a pile of pebbles. And the idea is that at crossroads, when you were traveling, when you come to a crossroad, you have to take one path or the other, right? I mean, there's a famous Robert Frost poem, Traveled. So, or The Road Not Taken, I think is the official name of that poem. And he doesn't take the other because he can't do both. All right? So when you come to the crossroads, you have to make a choice. And you would make a little prayer, and you would put a pebble on a pile or a little rock on a pile while you were making your prayer as like a little offering, and then you would head on your way. So you're wishing for good luck. So business people who were traveling for business, would do this on a regular basis. Those piles, and sometimes they're called Hermes Hills. That's what they mean by Hermes Hills. I think that the Herms were representations of that pile. So you get a pile of stones. If it gets high enough, you could imagine it as a stone block. Now, what about, well, it does two things. These herms then have these in the city as garden ornaments. They would be boundary markers, as well. So on the one hand, the erect phallus is basically a warning. You better get moving, right? You better F off, or else I'm gonna, beat you up. But also they serve as representations of fertility, so, which you might want for your garden, right? So your garden is growing well. So Hermes was sometimes represented as a fully human man, but also as a statue. Well, they're talking about the Herms, and the Herms are connected to Hermes, but originally I think they're connected to these piles of stones. And then the name sounded like Hermes, so Hermes gets connected to it that way. Because Hermes is usually depicted as beardless, but in the Herms they're always bearded. At least the ones from the ancient world seem to be always bearded. Here we have a picture of Hermes. It's a red figure lekythos. It's an oil flask. You pour out oil from it, painter. So there's a painting of Tithonus, who is the lover of the goddess Dawn, Eos. I saw Tithonus back in chapter 5. There's a famous vase of that by the painter who's called the Tithonus painter. He also did artwork. We've got Hermes. He appears to be moved. He's got his winged sandals, which are called the talaria, the winged sandals. He's got his caduceus, this staff, the herald's wand. The caduceus has a stick with two intertwined snakes. Now that's what this is supposed to figure 8 up top here. This is supposed to be the heads of the snakes intertwined. It doesn't look like that, but that's what it's supposed to be. He's wearing a chlamys, which is like a poncho that a traveler might carry, and the hat. The hat. This would be a wide-brimmed hat, like a sombrero, and the reason is, if you're traveling on the road, you're basically on the road for however many days you're traveling, and you're in the hot sun. You need protection for the head, and so you would have such a hat. That later becomes like a cap or a helmet, but originally it is actually a wide-brimmed hat, which is what I think this orange thing here is. So Hermes was represented as a fully human man. He's basically represented as a youth, like an 18-year-old kid. Apollo is represented more like a 20-year-old. He's a little now on the brink of adulthood. Hermes maybe is more like the edge of high school. He's not yet like a man, but he's close to that. The Herms, which we saw on the previous, were plinths, these square stone pillars that had a bearded head and a phallus. Were thought to derive from piles of rocks called Hermes Hills, the Hermai that I had mentioned. Hermes was honored by the Greeks for making roads safe for travelers. Okay, and Hermes is frequently depicted as the messenger of God, which makes sense since he's the god of roads, because messengers will use the roads. It's also about interconnection. So he's the god really about interconnection. Apollo, whom we'll see in the next chapter, is much more about this or that, or about the bridge between this and that. Which again befits him as a trickster figure. Hermes was venerated and messengers. He also escorted the dead to the underworld. So one of his titles is Psychopompus, the one who accompanies the souls to the underworld, which makes him really a particularly humane. There with the people after they've died, right? When they most need someone, he's there to escort them. So there is something about Hermes. He's a little bit closer to humans. He also likes to be in disguise and travel around and mix with humans much more than the other gods, who are much more standoffish. There was a festival, the Anthesteria, which was a flower festival. That's what the word Anthesteria. There was a drinking component. Hermes was also honored as part of that because it would happen in the spring. They would open up the old wine vats and share the wine, big drinking party. And when they did that, the idea was opening those vats also, in a sense, opened up in some way The dead would also pretend they had to go back when the festival was over, and Hermes was in effect invoked to escort the dead back to where they belong. It's a phallic Hermes, so this is Hermes with the big phallus. Scholars believe that Hermes Hills, the Hermae, were replaced by Herms, and they serve sort of as mile markers. They are most frequently found outdoors. In the city where they'd be in people's gardens. And I like to, I refer to these sometimes as garden gnomes with big boners. So big boner garden gnome. The erect phallus suggests Hermes' connection to the fertility of herd animals and also to vegetable, like you're in your garden, you're not going to have herd animals, but you will have so forth. He is also connected to luck, possessions. So the ability to hold on to your possessions, but also the ability to win at events. So he's a god associated with luck. Ancient Greeks used the phallus as an apotropaic symbol. Apotropaic simply means to ward something off, to ward evil off. So basically, as I said, this is a finger to F off, suggesting that Hermes played a role as protector, especially of shepherds. And there are some pictures of Hermes as sort of the good shepherd with the sheep on his shoulder. So here we have a marble relief from Sipnos. It's not a relief, it's actually a freestanding Herm. Here we have the Hermes Creophorus, Hermes carrying a ram. It's a Roman copy of a 5th century BCE classical Greek origin, someone named Calamus. Hermes protected certain communities. So there were certain city-states that had him as their patron, just like Athens had Athena. Tanagra celebrated him for saving them from a plague, and there was a festival that they would have where someone was around the city walls to represent that protection. And Hermes' son is also presented as ithyphallic. He's always got an erection. He's a nature god. He's got a ram's head. He's got this erection. So he's always sexually excited. He is not presented as a bad god, but of course, an overly friendly god who's running around after people with an erection is going to be a little off-putting, right? A little shocking, hence the word panic. Pan is associated with satyrs and with Dionysus. A young beardless Hermes, which is the way he's most often appeared, is associated with the transition of young men into adult. Apollo sort of oversees men who are becoming adults. They're leaving their childhood years and they're becoming adult males. And for some Greek use, I think this was a thing in Sparta, not so much in other parts of Greece. One of the things that young men were supposed to do as they were getting admitted to adulthood was they would steal someone's cattle. They'd steal like a cow or a bull, like the whole herd. But if they were successful in doing it, and I guess like time, right? So you'd steal it, then you would turn yourself in, and then you would be awarded like a prize for having successfully stolen. You'd give back the thing. So you didn't hold on to it, but you're still sort of demonstrating that you have ingenuity, right? That you can solve a problem. In this case, how to steal cattle without being or caught. Hestia. Hestia is in some ways Hermes' opposite, and in artwork, ancient bunch of gods, Hermes is often that seems to see the connection. Now, a different scholar, not Walter Otto, right, who saw singular quality as joy, sees Hermes' special quality as movement or speed. And so Hermes is movement, and Hestia is about staying home, staying put. She's the goddess of the hearth, and there aren't really many Hestia because she's the least anthropomorphized. Sometimes she is depicted. When she is depicted, she looks like a married woman, which is the picture we have here. She looks like a married woman, and she's seated. Originally, she wouldn't have had human form at all. So most of the Greek gods have early on. They're anthropomorphic. Hestia probably later. So originally she was probably just seen as the fireplace, as the hearth. and that of course represents the home, but it's not a story about a fireplace, right? You're not going to get a very big story. There was a fireplace. People sat around it. It kept them warm. It was the center of their home. The end, right? Stories involve characters going and doing stuff, but Hestia not so much. Hestia is the eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, but she's then the youngest because she's the last one to come out, right? Because he swallowed all his kids except for Zeus. Zeus never got swallowed. Zeus forced him to take an emetic, which caused him to vomit. He vomited forth the 5 kids he had swallowed and the rock that he had swallowed instead of Zeus, and they came back in the reverse order. So the rock came out first, and then the other god. He was the last one to come out, which makes her, in the second round, the youngest of the children of Cronus and Rhea, and makes Zeus, who never was swallowed, the oldest. So this way he gets to be the youngest, and she becomes the youngest, even though she started. She is an eternal virgin. She, obviously, since she is originally just a fireplace, fireplaces don't have sex lives. She's associated with the hearth and fire. She's worshipped in the home. The word Hestia actually means hearth, and she represents the fixed center of home, right? So she's about fixity, about staying put, about home, and Hermes is about traveling and moving about. And here we have a red figure, a detail of it showing Hestia seated on this throne. And it may very well, it actually does say right here, Hestia. It's sort of in reverse order, but that says Hestia right there. So this is sort of how we know this is actually Hestia. Part of this chapter in Homeric hymn number 4 to Hermes. And Homeric hymn number 4 is a beautiful hymn. It does praise Hermes, but it praises Hermes for basically being a lying and cheating and stealing little baby. So it's a pretty humorous story. I think it's meant to be that. It was no doubt sung at festivals, probably agricultural festivals, but maybe at other festivals in honor of Hermes. So the Greeks don't have a problem in making fun of their. They don't really mean any disrespect. Hermes is quite clever. He manages to get his way without a lot of, which is not, known. And the Greeks, I think, appreciate that. So Homeric hymn number 4 tells the story of Hermes' first day or two. So he's basically a day old when the poem opens, and about a day allowed, maybe day 2 and day 3 or something. Baby Hermes, in that day, manages to create, so he makes a musical instrument, a stringed instrument, the ancestor of the modern guitar. He learns to sing and begins to sing ribald songs. So he basically tells a song about how Zeus, his father, and Maya, his mother, had sex. It's not gone into in detail. He presumably goes into detail, but the author doesn't go into detail. But it's a pretty, there were such songs. People did sing songs that were basically satiric and sexual in orientation. We saw that with the women, and people would exchange dirty jokes. Surprising that Hermes would sing such, such songs did exist. They would be a big entertainment in the country, so it's not that surprising. But to sing it about your own parents is a bit wild. And of course, he's also accompanying himself, so not only did he create the lyre, he knows how to play the guitar right away and to compose songs and sing them while he's playing on the guitar. So it's pretty impressive. He is, after all, only a baby. He steals 50 of Apollo's cattle. He gets hauled before Zeus by Apollo. Apollo grabs him and hauls him to Zeus. Meanwhile, he's lying his head off. I don't know what cattle are. I'm just a baby. How could I rustle cattle? Look at me. I'm not big. How could I do that? So he then even lies to Zeus, and Zeus thinks it's funny. But then Zeus tells Hermes that he and Apollo have to work this out among themselves. He's not getting involved, and Apollo's still pretty upset. Then Hermes takes out the lyre and starts playing music on it, and Apollo is absolutely dumbstruck. He loves the lyre, he wants the lyre, and he cuts a deal. So they start off as enemies, but by the end of the poem, they're best friends forever. In fact, Apollo are often deal with young men becoming adults. Hermes like the younger end of that, Apollo the older end of that. But they're otherwise sort of opposites. Hermes is basically, establishment. Apollo is very much Mr. Establishment. Apollo is all about order. Hermes is a much more chaotic figure. But they become sort of best friends. I mean, it's almost like they each understand that they need the other to be complete. So it ends on a happy note with Apollo giving Hermes various gifts. One of the gifts he gives him is he informs him about the three eye. Three eye means pebbles, and remember the pebbles are sort of connected. The were some sisters who they couldn't exactly predict the future, but they could get a general sense of the future. So think something like Las Vegas odds makers. They don't know but they've got pretty good information, and they're often correct. And so Apollo cannot give him the gift of prophecy, which is what he asks for, but the three eyes. So he may not have quite as much knowledge about the future as Apollo or Zeus, but he has some. So he's a sort of a clever guy. The hymn focuses on Hermes as a trickster figure. Right? Trickster figures often work outside the line, right? And they're often humorous. They often mock the social society to work. It does have rules and regs that you need to follow. But the people who are always emphasizing rules and regulations are often stick in the mud characters, and we don't really like them. What we like is the charming guy, the charming rogue who somehow gets around the rules. Hermes often gets around the rules, but he knows when to stop. So he also sort of lies to Zeus, but he doesn't. Zeus says to Hermes and Apollo, you guys need to work this out. Game time's over. He's willing to do what he has to. The other thing about trickster figures is the trickster figures often they're lumped into a particular category, but they're not willing to accept that. And Hermes definitely in this poem he's a country god. His mother Maya is living in a cave in eastern Greece because she wants to avoid Hera's wrath. So she's smart, but she and her kid are living in the stick. We're going to Mount Olympus. We're going to be Olympian gods, which is like a major thing. So to get in that special group, in fact, that Hermes says, no, I'm not accepting this. We're going all the way. Makes him a trickster figure.